My name's Tom Fell. I've been compiling this year's 9th of July historical documents, autographs and postal history sale. It's a nice offering this year of just over 200 lots, ranging from financial documents of the Charles I and Charles II period, all the way through to rare photographs of the 19th and 18th century, a nice collection of Sudan ephemera, and a lovely offering of European royals. I'd like to start, however, with lot 2022, which is a letter signed by Charles I, signed at the top here, to Robert Rich, who at the time was Lord High Admiral. Time of writing here is 1642, 28th of June. In this letter, Charles I is writing to Robert Rich to ask that he stepped down from his position of Lord High Admiral. It's right on the eve of civil war. Charles I is looking around at what's going on. He sees Robert Rich, who is a known parliamentarian, in front of, he's in charge of the Navy at the time, and he's asking him in no uncertain terms to step down from this position. We know from history that Robert Rich didn't do this. He then went on to take for the parliamentary cause certain naval ports that would have been of high value and high stake during the Civil War. But we have in writing here Charles I's known intentions to remove him from this position. The document itself is a copy, it's a duplicate, but no less interesting. It would have been retained likely for filing purposes. And it's sold with provenance of being from the John Brown collection, sold by Sotheby's in 1947. And it comes in the lot with the papers of the Royal Commission on Historical Manuscripts. It's gone through their system, they've catalogued it, and they'd like to know where it goes after this sale. So that's lot 2022. And moving on in the same vein to lot 2044, somewhat later on, in the Charles II period, we have a purely financial document here. In November of 1671, this memorandum was penned to make an account of all orders passed to Sir Thomas Osborne and Sir Thomas Littleton, joint treasurers of the Navy, for essentially orders made out of the budget for the Navy. You can see it's been written up in some haste. I'll take it out for you here. There's scribblings and sums being calculated all down this half, and quite kind of scrawly writing in this top half. Just under a year later, in fact only months, in January of 1672, there was the great stop of the Exchequer. Charles II had been raising funds for the Third Anglo-Dutch War, which had put a huge drain on expenses of the Treasury, and the rise of goldsmith bankers in some ways aided the kind of increase of budget for these wars, but the Crown borrowed so much that in the end they just couldn't pay it back. The goldsmith bankers suffered greatly, particularly Viner comes up, Backwell, and it was a monumental period in British history. I believe this to be an early premonition or an early kind of working out of the financial situation of the period, and in that respect it's fascinating. I think it's priced quite reasonably. The low estimate is £300, and at that price it's a steal. Moving on, we leave the 17th century for the 20th, and we have a pair of fascinating artefacts, really. We all know the story of the Titanic. Here we have a pair of brochures for the White Star Line fleet, which at that time comprised of the Olympic and the Titanic. These would have been released as kind of pre-launch publicity brochures, and what's rather nice about them, and unique I suppose in print, is that it gives us a sense of the opulence on board, particularly in this one, which is the first and second class accommodation. You have, let me just pull you out an example, I believe there's 16 colour illustrations here. So for example here you have the Turkish bath and cooling room and a swimming bath, which I think look perfectly suitable. We also have a rather grand looking sitting room of parlour suite, and the list goes on. There it lists all sorts of facilities that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and certainly the prospective passenger wouldn't necessarily expect to see on board a ship at that period. The first and second class brochure here is bound with a beautiful bit of silk on the side, and really is a sign of the opulence that was advertised in these ships. So that's lot 2110 and has an asking price of 4,000 to 5,000. And the next lot, 2111, is a third class accommodation brochure. Somewhat scarcer, but with the same estimate, purely for, as it says, third class accommodation. And again, fascinatingly, it has glimpses of conditions aboard the Titanic. You can see here rather sparser conditions in third class. You sleep where you excrete, essentially. But still, perfectly acceptable conditions. And then to fill space, presumably because in third class there isn't much to shout about, they give these fascinating illustrations of the construction of the Titanic and the Olympic. So here you have this immense anchor weighing 15.5 tons, and you have the rudder weighing 101.5 tons. These two, I think, are a fascinating pair and should do very well, I hope. Again, the estimate here is 4,000 to 5,000. Moving on to Europe now. We leave the UK behind and we haven't quite forgotten about Europe yet. This is lot 2131A, and quite possibly the standout lot for this sale. It rather precedes what I'm about to talk about, but nonetheless it takes precedence as being remarkable. We have here the signature of Louis Charles, or Louis Charles the 17th, depending on how you may want to refer to him. It's a sad story. He's known as the Lost Dauphin, and here he's practicing his signature by way of penmanship. Along here he's signing simply Louis Charles, and at the bottom, we think by way of clearing his pen, he scribbles Louis, Louis, and it kind of fades out there. Louis Charles was the second son of Louis XVI, and when, during the French Revolution, his brother, Louis Charles's brother, the first son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, died, all hopes were thrust upon young Louis Charles. And when, as we all know, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed in 1793, Louis Charles was imprisoned by the Republican forces. He spent a number of years in prison, and by royalists he was recognised as Louis XVII, but obviously not so by the Republicans. This is a particularly rare, exceedingly rare surviving example of his signature. He died, I believe, aged 10, so for this to survive, for this to even have been created, is quite astonishing. It brings an estimate at auction of 20 to 30,000 and fully justifies that. It comes with these engravings included in this nice leather-bound presentation book, and I think is a sublime artefact of a period of history, really, where we don't know an awful lot about what happened to Louis XVII during his imprisonment. We know he died of scrofula, or so the coroner's report goes, I think, which in modern day terms is lymphatic tuberculosis. But the coroner also found various scratches and bruises on his body. The lost young Dauphin would have gone through a wretched time under Republican hands, and this is a very poignant memory of his life and that period of history. And predating Louis Charles or Louis XVII, I will talk about as part of a large collection of correspondence between mostly Great Britain but also France and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. This charming pair of letters, the first being from Marie Antoinette, and both appear in this wonderful presentation. They've been folded perfectly and tied by these lovely blue ribbons, top and bottom, and bearing a fantastic red seal front and back. And they unfold here on gilded paper. Their letters signed, so they would have had a scribe write these and then would sign just at the bottom here. So here's Marie Antoinette. Written in July of 1790, they are addressed to King Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies, congratulating him and Maria Carolina on the marriage of 3 of their children to royals in the Austrian dynasty. These 3 marriages were the centre of European attention at the time. They were written, this letter, 1790, just 3 years before the King and Queen were executed, while they were under imprisonment at the Tuileries under Republican forces, and just a year before they tried to escape to Varan. This letter represents a kind of hope for the retention of European divine rights to power. And Marie Antoinette would have been particularly excited by these marriages, in that her sister, Maria Carolina, was King Ferdinand I's wife, and so she has a vested interest in these marriages in many respects. But really a fascinating piece of history. That, the Marie Antoinette letter, is 2144 and has an estimate of 2,200 to 2,500, and is followed by a letter to the same effect, rather more detached, of King Louis XVI. Again in the same format, folded quite beautifully and tied by these 2 pieces of blue ribbon. The King addresses King Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies and congratulates him. A remarkable pair. King Louis bringing an estimate of 1,800 to 2,000, nonetheless fascinating, and we shall see how they go. As part of the same correspondence and collection, we have lot 2166, which is part of a series of a number of letters from Queen Victoria to Kingdom of Two Sicilies. A slightly different style of folding here, but again a similar kind of thing. A lot of these correspondences formed were in this kind of style. This is my favourite of Queen Victoria's letters to the Kingdom of Two Sicilies within this collection. Unfortunately it suffered a little bit along the folds, but nothing that a bit of repairing couldn't do. we couldn't fix up here. This letter is dated February the 14th, 1840, which, as I'm sure you know, is the day of St. Valentine's. And the contents are rather suitable, given its date. She's writing to the Queen of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies at the time to let her know of her extremely happy and successful marriage to Albert, which, as we know, would prosper, and the pair were united by a very genuine love. This, I think, is a very sweet artefact of that marriage, and really one that I think is worth celebrating. As part of a collection of Sudan, and Sudan is a wonderful collecting area, you can collect stamps, the ephemera related to the historical period. We have a number of nice artefacts. Lot 2202 here is a rather fine signed photograph, signed and dated, of General Baron Rudolf von Slatin. A fascinating character. He was Governor General of the Dara until his capture by Mahdist forces, and he stayed 11 years in captive under Mahdist forces and eventually escaped over 1,000 kilometres to safety. This was just a couple of months before he signed this fantastic photograph. A lot of these generals in the Sudan, especially if they were associated with such heroic stories such as Gordon, became kind of celebrities in their own right. And this is an example of how he became famous. The estimate here is 200 to 250, and I think is a nice addition to anyone's collection of Sudan. And to round this off and bring it back to the UK, I've left this to the end because it's particularly remarkable, and because it's not particularly in line with the rest of the sale. The rest of the sale is manuscripts and documents, and perhaps slightly earlier photographs, but a lot that we're particularly excited to bring to sale. Lot 2127 is a collection of 140 35mm black and white photographs of the Beatles tour to Munich in 1966. I have a couple of examples for you here that the photographer Frank Fischbeck had made prints of at the time, and they show all members in front of Fischbeck's camera looking extremely relaxed. Here's George Harrison showing off his abdominal muscles. Here's Ringo Starr kind of pinching Fischbeck's camera and taking a photograph of himself in the mirror. And here is Paul McCartney eating a strawberry, I think, if you look at the rest of the images. They had a big bowl of fruit in their hotel suite. And I think what's remarkable about these images is that all members of the band appear extremely relaxed, extremely comfortable, and they're displaying their kind of boyish charm that the Beatles are known for. The 1966 tour was documented. There were photographers at the stadium during their performance, but unique to this set of sets are these images in their hotel suite, and also after the performance when they boarded the train at Munich station to go home. The set is sold with copyright, which is obviously an advantage, and the estimate here is 10,000 to 30,000. They're a beautiful set, and really a credit to the photographer Fischbeck's kind of skill of opportunism to be able to follow the Beatles as part of their entourage from arriving in the hotel suite into their hotel room, blending in with them, being invited to their concert, and managing to board the train with them at the end. A remarkable lot, and I'm sure will attract a lot of interest. That's all for now, and I wish you all the best of luck with your bids.